My very pleasure to welcome you all to this second and International Day of the Berlin Demography Days. Since 2012, this annual conference series brings together international stakeholders from science, politics, society, and business to discuss the most recent policy relevant issues of population change. I welcome you all on behalf of our network Population Europe. We have a strong focus on stakeholder dialogue about demographic change, and the Berlin Demography Days is one of our flagship activities, but also of our Berlin Demography Days partners, which is the Federal Institute for Population Research, BEB, the Federal Ministry for Education, Family Affairs, Senior Citizens, Women and Youth, the Federal Ministry of Health, and the Federal Ministry of Interior, and most of all, of our partner for the second day, the project VID, Identities, Migration and Democracy. The coordinator of this project, Claudia Neu, will speak to you in a second. I would like to take this opportunity to thank the European Commission for generously funding this important project as part of the Horizon Europe program. Yesterday at the evening event, the European Commissioner Dubravka Šuica gave a great talk highlighting the importance of the topic, demography and democracy. Indeed, democratic resilience depends heavily on a thorough understanding of recent and upcoming population changes, because they shape the needs, desires, challenges, and fears of our citizens. And this is true from the European down to the regional, national, to the municipal level, and in nearly all policy fields. It's not only important for the current electoral period, but also for the decades to come. For example, when the last strong baby boomer cohorts reach retirement age, the shortage of skilled workers will become more urgent, and so on. So we are very happy about our cooperation with VID and look very much forward to the next hours of exciting talks and discussion. And without further ado, I would like to hand over to the coordinator of this VID project, Professor Claudia Neu from the University of Göttingen, where she has a professorship for rural sociology. Claudia, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Andreas, for having us here. It's a great honor for the European funded project VID to cooperate this afternoon with the Berlin Demography Days and also Population Europe. VID is a 3-year project funded by the EU Horizon program, as I said before. The VID consortium is now consistent of 7 partners. St. Andrews, Presenter Hill, know Hill very well. He is a famous person in the demography community. You see him in the next session. Then Bocconi University by Arni Arnstein, the Institute for Population and Humanity in Sofia, then the Institute Ivo Pilar in Croatia, the Civics Innovation Hub in Germany, and CBSS, Council of the Baltic Sea States, located in Stockholm, and last but not least, our favorable colleagues VID project, not just quantitative or with quantitative data. We have a strong core of qualitative empirical research, and in the next year we are going to start with our 5 case studies in Scotland, Lithuania, Croatia, Bulgaria, and in Germany. The main theme of this year's Berlin Demographic Days is demography and democracy. We are also focusing on these themes today, exploring issues such as migration and the labor market, identity and belonging, diversity, and rural areas. We will hear from 3 panels, each with 3 distinguished guests. I will hand over immediately to Hill. Thank you very much for hosting this session about global global migration and the local gaps. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Claudia. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the first session today of the Berlin Demography Days. I also used the opportunity to congratulate the winners of the European Demographer Award. So really well done, Eva, Cosmo, and Julia. So this award ceremony took place yesterday evening. Right, back to our session. So the name of the session is Global Talent, Local Gaps, Skilled Migration and Territorial Divides. So the focus of this session or the panel discussion is on skilled migration, its effects on European regions and the migrant themselves. I'm Kulu from the University of St. Andrews, and I'm here to moderate this session. We have three panelists representing politics, business sector, and academia. And let me briefly introduce each of our distinguished panelists. Tanya Hristova has had a long career in politics. Currently, she is a mayor of Gabrovo Municipality in Bulgaria. She is also the leader of the Bulgarian delegation at the European Committee of the Regions and vice chair of the Commission for Social Policy, Education, Employment, Research and Culture. About Gabrovo, it is a town of 50,000 inhabitants in the middle of Bulgaria. Internationally, it is known as a center of humor and satire. It has two theaters, and in May each year, Gabrovo hosts an annual carnival of humor and satire. Saaya Sorrells-Weatherford is the Chief Executive Officer and co-founder of Emigreat, a startup that helps businesses to navigate immigration laws, reducing uncertainty and workload for them. Emigreat does not only support companies, it also helps migrants to navigate their way to residency, permanent work status, or citizenship. Saaya Sorrells-Weatherford has lived in multiple countries and has faced numerous obstacles in the relocation process. By founding Emigreat, she hopes to empower more people to confidently navigate the immigration system in Sweden, where she lives since 2019. She's winner of the T-Digital's Female Founder of the Year and Nordic Female Founder of the Year in 2023. Parvati Raghuram is a professor of geography and migration at the Open University. Her research interests focus on the ways in which mobility of individuals, goods, and ideas are reshaping the world. She has studied the experiences of gendered workers in knowledge sectors such as medicine, education, and IT. Professor Raghuram has published 5 books, such as Gendered Migrations and Global Social Reproduction, or Tracing an Indian Diaspora, and of course, numerous book chapters and articles. Currently, she is chair of the executive board of directors of IMISCO. This is the largest European network of scholars in the area of migration and integration. Very warm welcome to our panel. Right, okay, this was more formal parts, introduction. Now let's go to the questions and the discussion. The panelists have received 2 questions. Each of panelists will have 3 to 5 minutes for a question. So this is what we have agreed. Once they have discussed both questions and potential follow-up questions, so the audience will also have the opportunity to contribute to the discussion. Right. Okay, let's now move to the first question, which is as follows. How do global competition for talent and national migration policies shape regional cohesion and experiences of skilled migrants across Europe and beyond? So this is quite a wide question, and perhaps we start with the regional aspect, and I'm now glad to hand over to Tanya Hristova. Please, the floor is yours via the screen.
Thank you very much, Kil. Thank you for the opportunity also to be part of this very important topic and to have such an amazing panelist. And thank you for presenting my city in such an original way. We are really quite diverse in combining different assets. But let's come back to the topic, which is really very important, because the competition for talent has become one of the defining features of our time. It is reshaping our labor markets and the geography of opportunity across Europe, and not only. We are obviously witnessing reorganizations of skills and innovation capacity. And this is something that defines and determines which regions will be successful and which, unfortunately, risk being left behind. Across the continent, the demographic changes are accelerating, and this implies also for my country and for my municipality, because populations are aging, the working age groups is shrinking, and in many territories, especially in countries like mine in Central, Eastern and Southern Europe, young people leave to seek prospects elsewhere. Meanwhile, new sectors such as the green and digital economies demand qualifications that local labor markets struggle to supply. Here, I would like to mention that my city is one of the cities, the mission for climate neutrality and smart, which is also something as an instrument that we want to address these challenges. In this context, global competitions for skilled people has already intensified, and countries, regions, cities are trying to attract researchers, engineers. Especially in the health sector, we have so very strong demands. Initiatives such as the revised European Blue Card and the talent partnerships are good examples, but they are not as efficient as we would like to. Yet, within our continent, we see also new imbalances that are emerging, because skilled migrants tend to settle mainly in large urban centers, where recognition probably is faster and where the ecosystems are stronger and services are better approached, while some small territories, former industrial and mountainous areas remain on the margins. And in this way, they lose their own traits and attract very few newcomers, which produces very serious social challenges. From the Committee of the Regions, which I'm also a member, see this as a clear governance challenge, because migration and skill policies are still predominantly national, while they have impact deeply on our local and regional and territorial levels. Cities and regions must be part of the solutions, because we are to face the consequences. We know the proper labor shortages, we face depopulation, and we also have the opportunities to provide part of the solutions. And in this way, I would like to just mention a few elements that probably could be instrumental for rebalancing these imbalanced situations. Because first, we think at the Committee of the Regions and on the local and regional level that we have to localize skills and migration policy. Cities and regions, as I have mentioned, know where shortages exist and what training specifically and integration capacities are needed and could be in place. They should be involved from the start of policy design and not to have us as mere implementers of national or even European policies. And in this place, cohesion policy and also ESF Plus really offer amazing opportunities, and this could be used for financing regional skills in different innovative approaches like skills observatories, lifelong learning hubs, partnerships linking employers, training providers, and also migrants. Some of these initiatives are already present in our cities and regions. Second, we need multi-regional and cross-border ecosystems because we know that talent follows the opportunities. And in this regard, networks of research, innovation, and quality of life should be addressed at simultaneous way. And here I would also like to mention something that is a positive element in my city, is the fact that we have a technical university and we work very close with the educational and business representatives, and we try to move in an ecosystemic way. And in this regard, we move to the third condition, which we consider as very important, and it is that the national migration policies should integrate in a more concrete and pragmatic way the territorial dimensions. And concrete incentives could encourage skilled workers to relocate to regions which experience shortages, and when they are combined with proper social packages, probably this will convince them to move with their families and include in the social fabrics of the demanding regions, because this is something that could not be simply addressed by focusing on the skills and competencies. And something that is also very important is to realize that we should view mobility as a two-way process, because on the one hand, we should continue working for the encouragement of nationals who currently work abroad, probably to come back, and in this way to address the drain brain. But on the other hand, we should work with the local people and to provide proper conditions in order to give the local people the right to stay in our territories. And in this regard, I think that the drain brain could be something that will benefit and bring benefits that we define at the Committee of the Regions as brain gain. And territorial cohesion is not only limiting mobility, but enabling, as I have mentioned, it for everyone. Every region, every city should have access to Europe's talent flows, not only the biggest and the capital cities. And in this regard, if we have to transform the challenges into opportunities, we will be able to contribute to a more competitive and more cohesive Europe, because when we manage to provide proper conditions for migrants and for people who want to identify the place as a proper place to develop their working ambitions and also find proper social support, then I think it will be really proving that the place-based approach is part of the solutions that should be engaged on local, regional, national, and European level. Because if I have to conclude in one sentence, it is in our cities, in our regions, in our communities that the talents and democracy could be really made feasible and could be felt on an everyday basis. I think I should stop here. Thank you.
Many thanks indeed, Tanya, Hristova. Now we move on to Saaya, Sorrells-Weatherford. I understand that you probably are going to more focus on the experience of the migrants themselves.
Yes, I think so. But also I think that Tanya reflected a lot of the things that I've been looking at as well regarding kind of the difference in competition between the capitals and the countryside and that mismatch. But in general, from kind of my work, I've seen basically that the demand for skilled talent is a global thing. But migration systems are still national, and we are becoming increasingly nationalistic with this view as well. On top of that, Europe competes not only with the US or Canada, but it also competes internally. So I'm in Gothenburg in Sweden, but we're competing with Stockholm. Milan might be competing with Turin, but it's generally then within each country, they're also competing for attraction, and there's a very limited pool that everybody's competing for. Most policies were designed decades ago for large corporations and traditional industries, and they don't necessarily reflect how people and companies operate today. So things like startups, digital firms, hybrid workplaces, those move quickly across borders, and they have very different accounting or growth systems, but the rules still assume things like fixed offices, long contracts, and slow bureaucracy as well. I think on top of that, we have a really big policy mismatch. So national systems focus more on compliance and control than attraction and integration. They certainly focus a lot more within that regard on attraction. So even in Sweden, there's big discussions about attracting highly skilled talent, while they also slash their immigration policies and make it more difficult for people to actually stay. And there's a massive imbalance. On top of that, it's often the capitals that design and decide for the entire country, setting their standards like salary thresholds or the assumptions around cost of living based on their own economies. So those benchmarks might work in Stockholm or Berlin, but they exclude employers and candidates in smaller cities where the wages and living costs differ sharply. So what happens is that a few magnet cities absorb most of the newcomers based on also their brand value, and then mid-sized regions are facing shortages despite the strong demand. And cohesion then weakens when the innovation and demographic renewal concentrates only in the capitals. On top of that, policies also lag behind demographic reality. So Europe's working age population is shrinking, but the pathways for skilled migration and also support for skilled migrants already in the different countries is very narrow and rigid. In Sweden, from what we've worked with, there's been a lot of tightening of immigration rules and a much more nationalistic tone that have added further friction, and employers outside Stockholm often face longer processing times or inconsistent interpretations from authorities. So across Europe, governments, like I mentioned, they talk about attracting talent, but then they still operate with frameworks designed for the last economy. From direct experience, then helping people and organizations navigate their immigration processes, the biggest obstacles are rarely the legal impossibilities and more the inconsistent information and the fact that rules are subject to change very quickly and without warning. And when processes lack transparency, both the workers and employers retreat to the few environments that feel predictable. And we're seeing a lot more in Sweden, for example, of people that are non-Swedes immediately being eliminated because there is this environment of fear that's being created. And smaller regions, even those with better quality of life or sectoral strength, remain invisible internationally. So it's more about the lack of institutional clarity that we're facing. In terms of competitiveness, I think it depends on harmonizing the talent policy across regions, not just the borders, and designing systems that account for modern business models and regional cost structures rather than assuming that one capital-based standard fits everything. So better coordination and shared data between the national and regional actors would make the full map of Europe opportunity visible and support balanced development rather than concentrations.
Right. Many thanks indeed, Saaya. And now we move to Parvati, Raghuram. So please, the floor is yours via the screen.
Great. Thanks ever so much. And thanks for two really brilliant provocations from the other people. So a few things. One of them is just an anecdote, right? When a few years ago, if we were investing in stocks and shares, then we would be told, actually, investing in the Asian market is it's adventurous, right? Are you an adventurous investor? Right now, that is seen as the place of growth. It's no longer seen as adventurous. So I think the first thing to think about is that what is the global and where is the economic growth has actually changed so much that actually we need to really think of what is the role of Europe in the round in the globe at the moment. So that's the first provocation. And as part of that, one of the things as it relates to skills is the role of the US, right? It has fallen out of the competition in some ways, in some particular ways. For instance, in the case of international students, student numbers of applications have fallen dramatically, right? There is some very low level outflow from the US of skills, but actually there is still a continuing attraction of skills, which is very interesting. And I've been reflecting on that as to why people, despite all the things that, the kind of H-1B visas being 100K and so on and so forth, what is going to happen to this, the global competition for skills? And what we see is some things like some IT firms completely withdrawing and relocating, either working at a distance, I think like Saaya said, or they are going through other routes like the L1 and so on and so forth. So in all of this, we need to think of what is, first of all, the global competition for talent and how is that being reshaped in the current moment, yeah? Another big change, I think, is the role of AI, and it's changing a nature and definition of talent. So certain things like, for instance, cybersecurity, all of that is going to really increase and is really important. But other areas, there is already an impact in certain sectors of like, for instance, in IT, data processing, things which are repetitive. Certain things like, for instance, even in medicine, things like radiology, pathology, which are repetitive activities, they are much more at risk in the next 10, 15 years. So the nature of talent itself is also changing. So, and then in all of this, the other thing to note is as part of what has happened with the changes in Europe is that the growth of semi-peripheries or the outside edges of Europe as places for parking talent labor, right? So actually, when you think about Europe, what you're seeing is like, for instance, Google's main offices are not in Germany or in the UK. They have offices there, but their big offices are in Krakow and in Dublin, right? And so what you're seeing is not exactly the posted worker model, but actually a model of people using the peripheries, lower costs, tax breaks in order to actually drive growth in particular countries. And I think these things are quite important when we think about growth, because for me, one of the things I feel is that regional cohesion has been really impacted by the fact that the growth is not adequate compared to what people have got used to. And I think that was a really good comment yesterday by somebody, is that people have actually got used to having a certain level of provision and of services, of opportunities, housing, so on and so forth. And when those are falling, that's what actually affects cohesion, right? So regional cohesion is very multifaceted, and we need to think of it in the round. So economic growth in particular, I would argue, often improves regional cohesion. And because people are searching really precisely for housing, for care, and for aspects of what they think of as a good life. So even in regions like, for instance, Quebec in Canada, which is what is called a Rocan province, which is a province which is where cultural integration where there is a cultural similarity and historical continuity, which is a bit like regional regions in Europe. What they have done is they've actually focused on economic integration, even though cultural integration was really important, right? So I think we need to think, therefore, of the extent to which cohesion is so dependent on economic growth. And then that leads to certain other questions of so why are we thinking about cohesion primarily within the context of migration, right? What about cohesion between the aging population and younger people, right? Or across genders and so on. And so there are multiple other divides to this notion of cohesion, which I think get underplayed because we often think of cohesion as a social and cultural, based on social and cultural differences of the migrant. And I think shifting away from that to think about cohesion more roundedly might actually help us to think about the importance of economic growth for all these forms of cohesion, and therefore the centrality and the central importance of skills of migration in this. I think we also have to recognize that a country like Germany, for instance, has a high rate of return migration. And so these are really challenges that you can see immediately, which are leading to, which can lead to problems of regional cohesion. And finally, on this topic, and these are really trying to spread the topic, and in the next question, I'll come back much more to specifics. But in this, I want to really open up the debate and open up the question a little bit. So the other part of it is that one thing that is really interesting for me working, I mean, I'm a migrant, as you can recognize, but also living and working in migrant communities, what I see is that migrants now see the cost of aging in the West, right? They are much more inclined to go back because unlike earlier, the problems of an aging society are far more visible in Europe. So I think that's something to also take on board, that there is anxiety now. What will happen if you, and especially like, for instance, if you look at Asia, very much a continent of growth, right? Then they think, actually, is it worth staying here? So what you might get is the best talent leaving and not necessarily the best talent staying. So I think you need to think of this as what's happening in the kind of a global perspective, and just open up that question a little bit so that we think a bit more laterally.
Thank you very much indeed, Parvati. I think many topics have been raised, and all important topics, and I see time flies. I just asked only whether any of the panelists would like to comment, have a comment on others' comments.
I'll just go quick.
Saaya, yes, please.
Yeah,
yes, please.
I thought, Parvati, what you said was so interesting about the problems of the aging society becoming more apparent. And then that discussion around, like, is Europe as attractive as it used to be? Are the countries actually, do they have what they need to attract the most highly skilled talent? Because I know, for example, in Sweden, they're imposing a lot of different, much stricter migration policies and really characterizing everything around like only attracting highly qualified, highly skilled talent. But it also feels like they're living on their former kind of national brand value. And I hadn't really thought about it so much within the context of the fact that the problems of the aging population are becoming more apparent as well. So I thought that was so interesting, what you said.
Thank you. And I found the other presentations really interesting as well. So thank you so much. I've made lots of notes.
Thank you. I think it's nice actually to move on to the second question. There was a question that how to make sure that to keep people, they are more likely to leave than in the past. We don't know for sure, but that was a comment. So now the second question: what can be done to ensure that newcomers are able to contribute meaningfully to the economic and social life of regions in need of skills? And how can policy and public narratives better support this? So would we like to go in the same order? So then it's opportunity, Tanya, you to start, and then Saaya and Parvati. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would start with saying that in order to ensure that newcomers really contribute meaningfully, it is not only about attracting talent. It is about actually creating systems that let people use their talents fully. Across Europe, it is obvious that we face many shortages and many challenges. While many qualified migrants remain underemployed. So there is a potential, there is a paradox, and what is really missing in my view is, if I may define it, the connection. And this connection it is known for everybody that it starts and it begins with recognition. And I mean recognition both formally and also in the human aspect, because formal recognition means something that is very important for our cities, for our territories. And I will give an example with a doctor or an engineer that could have their qualifications validated quickly and fairly and also transparently. And human recognition means being welcomed by the community that really values your skill and really welcomes you, which means the hospitality of our communities. Yet in many regions, procedures, we have to admit, are slow. They are in many aspects fragmented, and in this way they disencourage people from settling where they are most needed. And probably there are some small barriers that are stopping the procedure to reach its positive result. And here I will once state that local authorities can change this by better coordination of services, recognition, language learning, job matching, and of course, community orientation. And this could be organized into a kind of one-stop shop or some initiative that is organized in a single and coherent pathway. In my city, I can justify and I can give many examples, not with migration actually, but examples that bring really positive results when we have good coordination among local authority, among schools, among employers. And this is really something that could be used as a good platform to capitalize on. Integration, however, is not only about newcomers, and we know this. It must go hand in hand with lifelong learning for residents, so migration really complements rather than replaces local talent. This is what we call an inclusive skill ecosystem, where investments in newcomers and locals go in parallel. What we need? Yes, we need more policy coherence, because migration skills and local development strategies must be really better aligned. And here the engagement of employers could be very important. The second factor, it is trust, because cities support migration when they see tangible benefits. And this is something very logical, because people, local people, communities are really happy when they know that they have opportunities to get access to quality medical service, for example, in the hospital, thanks to the migrant who has the proper skills and who will provide this service to them. That is why we here need very good communication, and not only very good, but proper communication, which should be transparent and grounded in real local results. And in this regard, Committee of the Regions could be a really good partner and resource, because we can showcase good examples from different parts of Europe and share the evidence-based narratives. And the third element in my understanding is also reciprocity, because integration works when rights and responsibilities go together. And it is fair, because if community creates opportunities, then newcomers should engage, learn, and also contribute to this community life. And this reciprocity builds something that is very close to the democratic heart. It builds belonging, and this belonging actually turns migration from a temporary component into a real and lasting contribution for the richness and quality of the respective community. And of course, something that is also very important, and it is the component of social infrastructure. Because without affordable housing, without proper childcare, and without accessible public services, migration and community activities will not work for the benefits of all constituents. Without them, even the best designed programs will fail and will be apart from and it will remain distant from the needs of those that are searching for a job opportunity and also for those that are demanding employment once. And here again, cohesion policy and ESF Plus as instruments could be really very instrumental. And we know that beyond economics, integration is really a very important part of our democracy. Because when people feel that they belong, when they participate, institutions can only benefit. The contrary situation is related to frustration and something that is not associated with our European democracy. What we can do, it is to improve our systems, to be really faster, to be fairer, and to be really engaged with the challenges and worries of those who live across different parts of Europe, and also to take the opportunities that are open to our cities, to our businesses, and to our capacity to work in a democratic and fair way. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tanya. Saaya, please.
Yes. So I think one of the issues in terms of challenges for Europe is that it's not just about attracting talent, it's actually activating it. So we tend to measure success by arrivals instead of by how quickly people can actually use their skills once they're here. So I think contribution, though, begins before arrival. So if the process feels confusing or unpredictable, then people lose trust. And by the time they actually start, they've spent months navigating bureaucracy that should have actually helped them. On top of that, the systems that manage migration are built for control and not usability. And oftentimes, stakeholders are not brought into the conversation when defining these. So when we're talking about either immigration policies or frameworks for integration, it tends to be, think tanks of politicians or of large business owners, but not actually of people that have been through the process. And that could give very good feedback about the effectiveness of these different systems. So streamlining kind of procedures, but also like coordinating agencies and bringing the right stakeholders into the conversations to make meaningful contributions to these changes would remove a lot of friction without the major cost. On top of that, we need to talk about the narrative around migration. So migration in Europe is still framed either as a risk or as charity instead of actually renewal. So we need to talk about it as an economic infrastructure that keeps regions functioning. And local actors, not national headlines, should actually lead that story. So when municipalities and employers can show how newcomers fill shortages and build new companies, then that can help change perception. For a lot of people, at least from what I've seen in Sweden, but I've heard this story said it again and again, when people arrive, many can't work even if they want to because no one will hire them. So companies still recruit through these very narrow networks and they demand local experience or only recognize local education. So employers need training in inclusive recruitment and HR teams need to actually diversify to recognize international skills. And that's not just about being kind of inclusive or hitting your different, DEI goals. It's actually about competitiveness because Europe can't afford to import talent and then leave it unused. Policy can reinforce a shift. We can also pilot simpler regional migration pathways, or like Tanya was talking about, a much kind of easier pipeline from the moment they arrive all the way through. Ensure consistent rule interpretation across different offices, and also incentivize employer training in global hiring. And governments and regions should also highlight success stories that normalize migration as a part of growth. Meaningful contribution when it comes to migration depends on 3 things. So clear systems, open workspaces, and a confident public narrative. And when those align, newcomers contribute from day one, and then the regions that actually need them the most will finally gain the skills and innovation that they're missing.
Thank you very much, Saaya. Over to Parvati.
Great, thank you. So in this little presentation, I'm going to draw on examples of very focused areas, which is based upon a report I wrote for the India-EU Migration and Mobility Framework. And so I was asked to write the report on Indian women in the European Union. And so some of the examples and some of the research is is embedded in that. And you're welcome to write to me if you want to have a look at the bigger report. So what can be done to include newcomers? It's hard to follow these two people because they've covered so much. But I think just a couple of examples. So just to embed some of what they were saying, absolutely much better and earlier information. So the reach of institutes like the Goethe Institute, working with the embassies in order to really improve in-country information on what is the migration pathway. Because I think that's there is a lot of wasted talent, and very often information is not available. So people come here and then they are just waiting. There's a lot of waiting, irrespective of what industry you're working in. So that's a kind of one national policy, which I think perhaps hasn't been mentioned yet. The second one is just focusing in on particular industries. So you look at, for instance, doctors, right? There's a lot of wastage of skills in the medical migration, because they get a permit for 1 year to work in a particular Bundesland, for instance, in Germany, and then they when they're sitting in another country, they do not know which place is best, right? So, and they don't know where exactly the shortages are. So but once they've applied and they've taken the exam for one place, then they don't have flexibility to move to another region. And actually, if you want to improve regional, if you want to improve provision in particular regions, you need that regional flexibility in stage 1 for medicine. Yeah. And that has to be really made available. The information of that has to be made completely available. Again, taking the example of Germany, and that's a very different example, and looking at the IT sector, one of the things we found was that Germany is very interesting because it's got a lot of businesses in small towns and cities, and it's really not so much concentrated in the big cities as compared to other countries. So there's lots of small businesses which absolutely drive the German industrial innovation. But unfortunately, they're often located in smaller towns, and where there are very few women, for instance, who are working. And we interviewed people who said, well, actually, we were the only women who were employed, the migrant women, the only women who were employed in these sorts of sectors. The only other person is a receptionist. And we often see that. And that's because there is, like, for instance, in the Indian case, 35% or over of people currently in the IT sector are women. Whereas if you look at it in a particular entry into the IT sector, it's over 60%. You compare that to 14% in Europe, right? So what you end up is highly masculinized workplaces, which the Indian women are just completely unused to, right? And they end up feeling really, left out. They don't know what to do. And there are specific programs in Sweden and in Denmark, for instance, the Minerva, the KV Info, which recognize this kind of a gender imbalance, and actually, that we need to learn about gender equality in sectors like IT from India. We had a big project in the UK on that, and we gave a commentary to the Houses of Parliament on this. But there's a lot of gender equality in sectors which people do not necessarily anticipate. And we really need to think about that in the round. Then, so in some sectors, like, for instance, research, hypermobility is actually part of it. So if you do a postdoctoral research position in one institute, you need to do it in another institute and another institute in order to get a proper job, right? hypermobility is embedded into particular jobs. So in that case, you can think of much more about enabling in-country mobility and using that as a pathway into jobs, rather than thinking that, well, actually they'll go from Germany to France and France to, to Sweden and then settle somewhere else in Spain, right? Because that's where they end up. So if you want to retain your talent, you need to think about much better in-country mobility for all of this. I think one of the issues that hampers a lot of your people in Europe in terms of recruitment is the sense of brain drain, right? Actually, that is so limited in its relevance at the current moment. So, for instance, India has a huge overproduction of nurses, right, which is as in the Philippines. But in Germany, there is limited recruitment of Indian nurses because of the problems of brain drain. So it needs a much more targeted approach as to which countries actually does this brain drain actually affect. Then, of course, the other thing is that family migrants are skilled migrants. It's very rare, at least in Asia, for people to be, or rather, let me put it the other way, people often marry people within their own social class and often within their own profession. So you have, as we interview people in Hungary, man is in the IT sector, got a job there, but his wife is also in the IT sector, won't work. Similarly, in Poland, right? So we need to think about family migrants as skilled migrants because they're already in country and we need far better support for that. And then I think the big thing which Saaya also talks about and is obviously doing fantastic work on is entrepreneurship, is that really even huge companies recognize that actually they're going to be disrupted, right? Then the disruption is going to come as somebody who's, when I did an interview with a $1 billion organization, they said, our competitor is somebody who's sitting alone in a garage and producing something which is going to ruin us, right? So what we want to do is to bring them in-house, have sandpits, ways of thinking about innovation through entrepreneurship, but bring them in-house because we know that that's where the disruption is going to come from. So we need to attune to what disruption actually looks like, right? And make pathways for disruption, which are in-house. And of course, there's a lot of city-level things like welcoming communities, creating a sense of regional citizenship, public-private partnerships with settlement organizations, service providers and employers, multi-stakeholder networks for inclusion. All of these are really important at the city level, very much as Tanya said, because I think there's a lot of work that can be done there. Ultimately, what I think is Europe does have to face up to the issue of race, right? There's a real issue of nationalism and racism, and that is something that runs through and is becoming stronger, as we all know, and that's something that we're all having to deal with. But on the other hand, to recognize that actually economic growth will come with certain kinds of forms of integration has got to be something which is spoken about, taken strongly by the government as a statement that they have to make repeatedly, that this is the cost of not having skill migration. Thanks.
Thank you very much indeed to all three panelists. So lots of ideas, great ideas. Some of ideas we know, of course, and have been discussed, but also I think certainly new ideas of very simple things like welcoming people properly and how to do that. Also the examples of medical doctors, so what they can do, whether they can move or not, if they are allocated to certain places, and so on. I personally have a long list, but I cannot use this position to ask all these questions. What I'm going to do now, I'm going to open the floor to questions from the audience. So let's have some dynamics also for the last 10 minutes here. So feel free to either just to use the raise your hand feature, or then just to enter your question in the chat box. So there are two options at least, or you can just wave. Hopefully I can see. Right. There is a question I in the chat, and this is about I would like to know more about on the immigrants going back to their country for aging better. So, Parvati, please.
Yeah, I think they were really at the beginning of that curve. And well, probably because of my age as well, this is something that we definitely see much more of, because it costs £1,500. I mean, I live in the UK per week in here, whereas in a care home, but in India, it'll be a fraction of the price, right? So you already have, like you have aging migrants moving to places like Thailand for care. You also have skilled migrants looking forward to the fact that actually maybe this is not the place where there is either growth or a place for aging. It would have been worth it if the economic growth was forecast as adequate to make up for the cost of aging. But the projections of economic growth, because there isn't a younger population of the same size, are also poor. So that combination makes it, as my son said to me, he said, oh, I think I might leave. I said, why? Because he's never been, and he says, well, I don't want to be the last person to switch the lights off here, because this is a phrase in English, that if there isn't adequate growth, and actually, interestingly, Americans say that about Europe too, is that, where are we saying that? So this is something to watch for, is that if Europe really needs to change the way that it looks to the public. Because, and this happens in multiple ways. I mean, I think in other work that I'm doing in Africa, what I see is that there's a real anti-colonial push, and you would have seen this in Niger, Gabon. The French have been thrown out. There's even breaking away from the African Union. So nationalism is not just happening here, it's happening in other places as well, right? And they are also saying that actually maybe Europe is, so yes, for lesser skilled work, yes, for asylum, absolutely. And I think that's part of it, is to recognize the extent to which we also need lesser skilled workers, right? Because this, the economy requires, and those require a different set of skills. We maybe need to think of caring as skill. We need to think of other socially reproductive activities as skill, which is necessary for a population.
Right. For the questions, we have 5 minutes left. Ender, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you all for the very thought-provoking comments. Although we will have the recording, I couldn't stop taking notes. So very interesting takes for me. Yesterday, Parvati, you already mentioned that we had the similar discussions also starting yesterday. And then I'm thinking, we are talking about the bureaucracy like it is something isolated, like it says on authority. It's not like the national policies or decisions, but there is a bureaucracy there, somehow eliminating people or not welcoming people. But I understand this is national policies, like the people decide on topics, people decide to make it more harder or easier for people to integrate. As you said, Tanya, connection, recognition, not just qualifications, but also welcoming. People feel welcoming. So I'm very interested. Like, am I wrong? Isn't it just good rules, like to control or to manage to make it for everyone easier? But these are also very political decisions that governments do. And I'm also thinking, Tanya, and all of you actually, how much a city like Gabrovo, industrial town, expecting people to come contribute, has room or power when it comes to national policies and narratives? Like, how much power and room these regions and towns have to overcome these national burdens, if I may define. Yeah, thank you all.
So absolutely, policy is really primarily about managing. Sorry, was that to me? Or was it to?
I think we can go. Each of has opportunity to answer to a little bit different parts of Ender Khan's question. Yes, please.
So the policy is absolutely necessary and important. But I was talking to somebody this morning. They waited for 8 months to get their papers on something. Found out that actually they needed to take another exam in order to get a job. Then they waited a year. Now they've been in country in Germany, highly qualified, she's a doctor, but has not had a job for 3 years because she is just waiting for various policies. So there was not enough information which was available. And then when it was made available, then she applies for something, then it takes several months for it to hear back. So there is something about having a minimum speed at which responses are given in order to actually integrate people, because otherwise people will go back. But I think it's also who does one want then, right? It's just making sure that one is really clear about the growth potential, what's actually needed, and then really facilitating that through some fast pathway.
Saaya, and then Tanya, please.
I mean, it's a combination of, yes, the different policies are like established by governments, but I will say that, let's say, even if there are no policy changes, the interpretation of those policies will differ depending on what government and what sentiments are in place as well. We see that with the migration agency here, with the new government in place, none of the policies, none of the laws change, but the interpretation of those laws actually change. So it is actually like it's a bigger scope than what we think. We think, oh, the laws didn't change, so we can still follow along the same way that we have. But the information that you need is different. The way things are interpreted is different. The overall sentiment is different. I do think that kind of on the local level or smaller communities do have the possibility of affecting larger change, but they do end up, I think, either have to band together or partner with some of the larger capital players in order to be able to honestly be able to have a larger change, even though most of those, like Parvati said as well, blue collar is as important, if not more important, for making a society run as the engineers and the IT and the white collar jobs, but oftentimes governments just don't pay enough attention to them. But those are so important, especially in the aging populations that we have.
Right, and this leaves the last word actually to Tanya.
Yes, thank you to all the previous speakers, because you really helped me broaden my perspective and realizing how important it is to be very proactive in this field, because without our bottom-based engagement, it will be not possible to insist on the national level to be much more adequate with regards to what Europe provides as a framework opportunities. Because as a mayor of a city who is really making a lot of complex efforts, trying to improve the quality of living and also job opportunities, if we are not together with the national authorities, if we are not part of the agreements that will provide for Bulgaria to be addressed as a friendly for migrants, for skilled and not only skilled workers country, then how could my city benefit? And in this regard, I think what we so much need and what we so less have nowadays is political predictability, stability, and managing the so-called nationalism, which is really giving us a lot of negative impacts, not only on finding proper and adequate employees, but also it is limiting the ambition probably of some businesses because of this instability. And what we really need is to have this multi-level governance approach, because we are all part of the solution. And if we are not part of the solution, then we will be part of something that is really very dangerous, because we have so many technological components that we have to take into consideration. The capacity of Europe, the red tape, and the so many rules and conditionalities are probably stopping some of the migrants who are looking at Europe as a good opportunity. So we have to increase our speed. We have to work in a system, and we have to, I think, get out of the box, because nothing is as it used to be. And in order to have our cities and regions across Europe competitive, we really need to use all the possible opportunities, both to import skilled people. I mean, broader. I invest wider meaning in the word skilled, because in this regard, I think people who are open to enter new communities, to be part of new communities, and also to invest in our people so that they be ready to welcome people from outside. Because sometimes, because we miss to communicate proper, we find the local people disagreeing some good initiatives, which actually could be better communicated and better providing opportunities for citizens and institutions to participate. And I will finish with something that we created recently in my municipality. We created some local rules through which we want to encourage people, not only local, but from across Europe, and not only, if they want to study for nurses, they could apply for support, financial support, and not only to us as local authority. So small steps sometimes are very critical for the bigger plans. Thank you.
Right. Thank you very much. It is 22 past 2. It is time to close this panel session. So I use the opportunity to thank our 3 panelists for inspiring, insightful, and very informative discussion. Thank you very much for sharing your expertise and experience, Tanya, Saaya, and Parvati.